Thank you for taking a moment with page turners. So we're going to be talking about your book and books in general and self-acceptance as well, which is kind of a big theme of your book.
Right.
And the Authenticity Project, which is your book, is an uplifting and poignant read, actually. But for those who've not read it yet, what can readers expect from the book?
Well, it's the story of, it starts with an artist called Julian, who's 79 years old, and he's incredibly lonely because his wife has died 15 years previously. And he decides to write the story of his life, to tell his truth really in this little green exercise book, which he titles The Authenticity Project. And he leaves it in a cafe where it's picked up by the owner, Monica, and she does the same thing. She writes the truth about her life and leaves the book somewhere else. And that little book is passed between 6 people who all tell the truth about something in its pages, and as a result they all get to meet each other and they all change each other's lives in miraculous ways. So it's sort of uplifting, it's about community, it's about kindness, but it also deals with a lot of big issues because each of them has something they're grappling with, as we all do.
Yes, definitely. It's a lovely read. I love it. And the Authenticity Project is all, about being honest about who you are, especially with yourself. What made you choose to explore that theme in the book?
Well, it really came from my own experience because if you look back 6 years, my life from the outside, if you looked at my social media or anything like that, it all looked sort of very perfect and lovely and happy. And the reality was very different because I was horribly addicted to alcohol at the time. And although things looked great, underneath sort of everything was falling apart and it was having a huge impact on my mental health and my physical health. And I decided to tell the truth about what was really going on about my life in an online blog. And writing that blog really helped save my life, and it helped transform the lives of thousands of people all around the world who read it. And that really got me thinking, well, what would happen if other people told the truth about their lives? And that was really what led to the idea of the Authenticity Project.
Yeah, I think that's such a pertinent point. I think social media is great for lots and lots of things, but I think it's a highlights reel of someone's life. It's what people choose to put up there is their best day. It's their, their absolute greatest thing that's going on in their life. And it's not really an accurate reflection of the whole. You just see a very narrow sliver. And I think sometimes when you're kind of consuming people's best bits, I think you can feel a bit, it does put you on the back foot. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
and it's strange, isn't it? Because one of the topics that runs through the Authenticity Project is the idea of loneliness, and each of the characters actually is lonely in different ways. And it struck me that through social media we are connected to far more people than we've ever been connected to before. Each of us has thousands of contacts, and yet statistically we're more lonely than ever. And that I thought was an interesting conundrum.
Yeah, definitely. I think also kind of lockdown has kind of shown us, new ways to connect if we want to. And I think a lot of the time people are now kind of using tech in the past year especially to have kind of higher quality connections. I suppose I think people are being more thoughtful about it now, whereas I think lockdown and everything, technology was very throwaway. I think the connections you have, people don't reply for weeks. It's not like a normal kind of healthy interaction that can sustain you for long periods of time. So I think, yeah, definitely, I think I totally get that about social media making you feel lonelier than you did before. I think that's one of the loveliest things about the book, is kind of seeing yourself in those characters and kind of feeling reassured that it's not just you. Definitely. So at Patience, we're big on self-acceptance and being really proud of who you are. But what does self-acceptance mean to you?
Well, I think really it means accepting your flaws as well as your strengths, and not just accepting them, but really loving them in a way. And there's a quote actually right at the beginning of my book from Leonard Cohen. It's one of his lyrics, and it goes, ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering, there is a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. And the reason that seemed important to me, that quote, is I realized as I was writing the book that each of the characters has a central flaw, and actually it's those flaws that make them really lovable, and it makes them really human, and it makes them really unique. And for me, self-acceptance is about realizing that we all have flaws, and actually without those flaws we would be forgettable, we would be all the same, we would be, the world would be a very dull and boring place. And that, I think, is self-acceptance. It's about not just knowing what your flaws are, but accepting them and even loving them.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think I've kind of come to the conclusion that it's really good to know your limitations so you can manage your expectations about yourself, so you don't put, so many unrealistic aims and hopes and expect things that you're not achieving, but you can still work towards it, and the working towards it is often the fulfilling thing, not the actually the big idea at the end. I think
yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And also, our flaws are often the corollary to our strengths, so without one you don't have the other. So for instance, if somebody is particularly overly sensitive, it's often because they're also very empathetic, and one thing comes with the other. So it's, again, I think if you accept your strengths, you also to an extent have to accept the weaknesses that go with them.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously writing a novel is a massive achievement. How has that influenced your own self-acceptance and kind of self-esteem as well?
Oh, you know what? I think one of the hardest things about writing is the constant rejection. And, this, every single writer has been rejected over and over again. I have a copy of the rejection letter that J.K. Rowling got when she submitted her first Robert Galbraith novel, just as a reminder that, even the very best and most famous and most successful writers deal with rejection. And it's not just rejection when you're starting out, but also you're constantly being reviewed. So my novel has already been reviewed about 24,000 times on Goodreads, and as a result, some of those reviews are not going to be great. And it's so easy to discount all the really good reviews and just focus on the bad ones, which is what we do in life generally. We focus on the things that hurt us and not the things that that are really positive. And I think what I've come to realize is that unless you and your work are completely bland, somebody out there is not going to like you or your work. And that's just the way it is. If you're going to put your heart and soul out there in book form, you have to accept that there are people that will go, ooh, that's awful. It's like showing somebody your baby and them going, God, it's really ugly. But you sort of have to get used to it. So I think that's been a real learning experience for me. Is just being able to let it wash over you to an extent, and just remember that that is half of the course, not just for writing but for life.
Definitely. I think sort of that kind of rolling with the punches kind of resiliency is it's definitely a skill. I think it's something that you kind of build up over time, and I think eventually you do come to the conclusion that as long as you can look at yourself and say, yeah, I tried really hard, I did my best, I'm happy with what I've done, I think other criticism is easier to kind of deflect. Not that I always take it on board, but kind of just don't give it too much noise. I think it's definitely kind of discounting the positives and catastrophizing on the negatives. It's kind of just trying to keep a balance is kind of a skill that I'm we're kind of refining that skill continuously.
Yeah, I agree.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, don't drink too much. Could have done with that. But I think the big one actually is about fear, because I think when I was younger, I missed out on so many opportunities because I was scared of failure. And, in order not to fail, I didn't try. And, what I guess I've learned over time is that the only way that to be absolutely certain of failure is to not bother trying in the first place. And, there's a great quote, but I think it's Will Smith actually, and he said, on the other side of your maximum fear lie all the best things in life. And, what I've come to realize is that, when I feel really scared about something, it's normally because I'm something, there's a possibility of something really good happening. Is actually a good thing. Fear can be your friend. So I think that's what I would tell my younger self is don't be scared of fear. Fear is a natural part of living. If you're never scared of anything, it's because you're not living life enough.
Yeah.
I could have done with knowing that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And I think there's no growth that happens in your comfort zone. And I
Yeah.
think it's kind of people are often, I think, more loyal to their fears than their ambitions. I think, fear is so overwhelming, but I think sometimes the fear is the fear of change. I think like if you fail
Yeah.
at something, or if you even if you succeed at something, your life will probably change quite a bit. And I think that's scary. So I think that's why kind of, when good things happen, like people get married or get a new job, and sometimes you get that kind of like flat feeling afterwards. You feel a bit like low. I think it's the change, even though it's a good thing that's
Yeah.
happened.
I think that's right, and it's so easy just to get stuck in a rut, and that's where I was 6 years ago. When I quit drinking, I looked at my life and I thought, God, my life has got really small. It's really, it's over time it had got smaller and smaller and smaller, and I was just stuck in this little rut. And yeah, it's and getting out of that rut is really scary, but it has to be done.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's a quote that I like, which is it's quite like, you know, some might call it naff, but I quite like it. Boats are safe in the harbour, but that's not why boats were built. It's kind of,
mhm.
keeping safe, and actually you need to push yourself and go out there, and kind of that's how you're going to develop. But yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What are your top 3 tips that you'd say to people to help them accept themselves more?
Oh, I think, and the first thing is to realize that nobody is perfect. And actually, if you go a bit further than that, if you look at the people that you really admire, and look for their weaknesses, and then realize actually that they are unimportant, that they deal with them, that they actually make them, as I said before, more human, more real, more interesting. And if you can learn to love other people despite their weaknesses, then hopefully it means you can learn to love yourself despite your own weaknesses, if that makes sense. And don't spend too much time on social media. Social media, as we talked about earlier, it can be a really great thing. It can be a real force for good, and it can bring you together with people, and make you feel less alone, and all sorts of good things. But it can also really damage your mental health, because you're constantly looking at, as you said before, other people's best bits and best days, and comparing your reality to that. And so try not to spend too much time on social media. And yeah, the other one relates back to what we were just talking about: believe the compliments as well as the criticisms. I keep trying to tell myself that if I'm going to let myself believe the negative stuff, then I also have to believe it when people tell me positive stuff, because it's so easy. Somebody goes, oh, you're really good at X, Y, and Z. And you go, yeah. And I said, but you're not so good at that. And you go, oh. So it's believing the positive as well as the negative.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's kind of what you're saying about loving yourself is so key. And for years, I thought, loving yourself was like thinking that you're amazing and like everything. And I think actually it's kind of most of it is just not berating yourself when, you know, when you feel like you can't do something or something's not going right, when it's just kind of, it's actually more a feeling just like inner peace, this kind of, you know, just kind of looking at things objectively and being like, okay, this has happened, but I can do this, I can do that, let's like move on quickly. I think that's kind of, that's a skill as well. I think it does come with time, but I think it's definitely something that yeah, I'm still learning, but
I think we all are.
it's a process.
You can't stop learning, you know.
Definitely. Are there any practical things that you've done that you've found have increased your sense of self-acceptance?
Well, actually, to be honest, the real one is getting older. You know, as you just mentioned, you know, I think self-acceptance we get better at as we get older. You know, I remember sort of, you know, when I was a teenager in my 20s, I was really, you know, I would be so distraught if I thought somebody didn't like me for whatever reason, without thinking, actually, do I like them? You know, maybe we're just two very different people. You know, that doesn't matter, that happens. You know, I think you learn to accept yourself as you grow older. And also, you know, the other big, you know, sort of practical thing that happened, which I wouldn't suggest anyone does, by the way, is I had breast cancer a few years ago, and I think that really taught me not to sweat the small stuff. You know, when you sort of, you know, when you get to the stage where you think, actually, you know, I really might die, it does teach you that, you know, there are all the little things that we fret about and worry about constantly are unimportant, you know, so things like wrinkles and, you know, going grey, you know, I mean, I got to the stage where, you know, I would look at old people in the street and feel really jealous of them because I thought maybe I wouldn't ever get there. And I think when you've, you know, if you've ever felt like that, it makes you realize that aging is actually it's a gift. You know, it's not something that we should dread, you know, because the alternative is a hell of a lot worse. So you know, I think it is about age and life experience really that makes you realize that, you know, there are much bigger things to worry about than the things that we're constantly beating ourselves up about.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think sometimes something happens to put things in perspective, and I think, you know, after
Like
that,
the pandemic, for instance, you know, I mean, I think it's hopefully one, you know, one of the good things that will come out of all of this is that we will, you know, we will stop taking our health for granted, our freedoms for granted, our family, you know, all of the things that we've realized, you know, in the last few months are so important. You know, it's hopefully we can remember all of that.
yeah, definitely. And I think you're so right. Every birthday is a blessing, you know, it's
Mm.
definitely, definitely one. Um, at Patience, we obviously love books. We loved your book, and we want to know what you're loving. So what have you read recently that you've loved?
Oh, well, actually, a book that's just come out that I was lucky enough to read a few months before it came out is 100 Years of Lenni and Margot by Marianne Cronin. And it's just a gorgeous book about the friendship between two people who are both about to die. So it sounds really morbid, and it's not. It's wonderfully uplifting. And one of them is Margot is very old. She's in her 80s, and Lenni is a teenager with a terminal illness. So between them, they're 100 years old, and they form this wonderful friendship. And it's a really beautiful story. I really loved that. So yeah, I highly recommend that one to everyone.
Yeah, that's I know the one you mean, and it's really sweet. It's really
Yeah.
lovely.
And I'm currently reading The Glass House by Eve Chase, which, have you read that one yet?
I haven't yet, but I've heard excellent things about
Oh
that.
yeah, great. I haven't finished it yet, so you know, I couldn't give you any spoilers.
I
But
do love a mystery. I think sometimes I
mm.
find them really absorbing, you know, like when you just want to switch off and kind of escape from the world and kind of not think about it. I think mystery is always kind of like keep you really hooked.
Yes, I agree, and this is a great mystery because it's on two timelines. So you've got sort of, you know, it's I love a book sort of based in the past and the present simultaneously. So yes, it's gorgeous. Really enjoying it.
Amazing. What's the one book you're constantly recommending to people?
Oh, I actually I recommend all sorts of different books to different people because I think partly it depends what sort of mood I'm in, but also what sort of person they are. But I guess one that I think almost everybody would love, so I recommend it to all sorts of people, is Richard Osman's The Thursday Murder Club, which is just a really a really great fun read. And at times like this, when everything is a bit sort of miserable and depressing, it's a really fun, feel good mystery with some great characterizations. So yes, I recommend that to a lot of people.
Yeah, that was really clever. And I love that. I think another author kind of that was doing one of these recommended it too. And we're like, we just love how sassy they are. We love how like all
Mhm.
the, the retirement village people, they just got so much like joy of living and so much energy and this, yeah, they're really great characters. I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
What book or which book are you excited to read in 2021?
Oh, there's one coming up that I'm really, really looking forward to, which I haven't been able to blag a copy of yet, which is Taylor Jenkins Reid's latest, which is called Malibu Rising. Have you read it yet?
I have got a copy. Yes, I've got it on my
Oh,
Kindle.
oh, lucky you. Because I loved Daisy Jones and the Six, and I then, having read that and totally fallen in love with Daisy Jones, I then read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is one of her previous books, and loved that just as much. So I'm really looking forward to Malibu Rising, and I've seen a few people talking about it on social media, saying that it is as good as her previous book. So I'm super excited about that one.
Yeah, it is. I think like her books, Daisy Jones in particular, I think it'll be a really great film. I think like they should
Yeah.
adapt it really. Be
You know
great.
what? I listened to it on audio, and it was brilliantly done because they had a different voice for each of the different band members. So it really felt like you were, watching a documentary almost. And by the time I finished, I was so convinced that they must be a real band that I was gutted that I couldn't find their music. So closest I could get to was Fleetwood Mac. But yeah, so I love her writing,
Yeah,
and I think she just gets better and better.
yeah, I think she does too. Well, that's all the questions we had. Thank you so much for joining us.